Hey everybody, today I want to talk about one of those myths in the aquarium hobby that simply will not die. I've addressed this in the past, so I'm going to be fairly brief about it today. What I'm actually going to focus on more in this video is addressing some of the sort of yeah buts that I always get every time I talk about this. And what we're talking about is whether or not a razor blade can scratch the glass in your aquarium. And the short answer is that it cannot. But before we go any further, I want to make it perfectly clear that when I talk about a razor blade scratching your glass, this is what I'm talking about. Just a standard single edge steel razor blade. I bought a pack of 100 of these for about $8. Nothing fancy about it. It is just a simple steel razor blade. I'm not talking about anything that is hardened steel. I'm not talking about anything with carbon cutting edges. I'm not talking about ceramic, whatever. I'm talking about a simple steel razor blade and nothing more. So, having established that that's the type of metal we're talking about, that type of metal is softer than glass. And that's just all there is to it. A softer thing will not scratch a harder thing. You can take a block of cheese, and that cheese will not scratch acrylic. You cannot make that cheese scratch a piece of acrylic. I don't care what angle you hold the cheese at. I don't care how hard you press the cheese into the acrylic. I don't care how much you believe that the cheese is going to scratch the acrylic. Cheese is softer than acrylic. Cheese cannot scratch acrylic. Steel is softer than glass. Steel cannot scratch glass. That's it. That's the end of that discussion. There are no yeah buts. I always get some yeah buts, and we're going to address those. And the first one I always get is that a rusty razor blade will scratch glass. And that's fair enough, but that's not the razor blade scratching the glass. That is a steel razor blade that's been contaminated with surface rust, which is iron oxide or ferrous oxide. And the ferrous oxide is indeed harder than glass and therefore will scratch glass. But that's the iron oxide or the ferrous oxide scratching the glass. It is not the steel. A steel razor blade cannot scratch the glass in your aquarium. The other yeah but I always get is that, yeah, but when you're using a razor blade and you go down to the bottom and you get a little bit of sand and substrate in there and you drag it back up the glass, it scratches your glass. Okay, and that's fair enough. The substrate that you get between the razor blade and the glass, the substrate will indeed scratch the glass, depending on the substrate, of course. If you've got sand or something like that that's harder than glass, it will scratch it. The steel razor blade is not scratching the glass. If you're going to argue that scooping some glass up in the razor blade and dragging it up the glass is it's the razor blade that's scratching it, you may as well say that cotton balls scratch glass, because if you take a cotton ball and you go all the way down to the bottom of the tank and you get some sand caught in the cotton ball and you drag it up your glass, you're going to scratch your glass. It's not the cotton ball that's scratching the glass, it's the sand. And I could argue that you're far more likely to get sand caught in a cotton ball or, you know, a piece of polyester batting or something that you might use filter floss or something like that. You're much more likely to get sand and stuff caught up in it than you are a razor blade. When I use a razor blade, and I don't do it often, but when I do use a razor blade, I scrape downwards and then I come away from the glass. I don't go down and then back up. I don't go down and scoop up a bunch of sand and drag it back up the glass. I scrape down and then move away from the glass, and then I make sure there's no sand on the blade, and then I scrape again. The glass is perfectly safe from being scratched by the razor blade. There's nothing you can do to make that razor blade scratch that glass in and of itself. If you put sand on the razor blade, yes, the sand will scratch the glass. If you put rust on the razor blade, yes, rust will scratch your glass. A steel razor blade will not, cannot scratch your glass, and that's simply all there is to it. That's just how the physical world works. Whether you believe that to be true or not is irrelevant. It simply cannot be done, and that's just all there is to it. Again, I'm not talking about carbon blades. I'm not talking about high carbon steel or carbide tips or ceramic or anything like that. I'm talking about a standard common razor blade. Cannot scratch your glass. So I know that won't put this to bed, but there you go. There's today's video. So I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching this one. I'll see you real soon in the next one.